Welcome back, everyone. Dan Vega here, Spring Developer Advocate at VMware. Today we're talking about Spring Boot's 3.1 Docker Compose module. Now, if you've been around the channel, I know what you're thinking. Dan, you've already done a video on this, haven't you? I have. I will leave a link to that in the description below. So if you want to get all of the background, what this Docker Compose module does, how to use it, why you would want to use it, that's the video you should check out. This is a follow-up video. Why are we doing this follow-up video? A couple of reasons. One, when we did that video, 3.1 was not out yet. So we were looking at a feature that was not yet released. 3.1 is out now, and at least one thing has changed, and that is the ability to go ahead and generate that Docker Compose file for you. So when you create a project, that file is created for you. So we'll see that in action today. Two, the specific example we looked at, the Postgres database service. I had some questions around that. Hey, how do I get some insight? How do I look at the tables and the data that are in my Postgres database in a container? So I want to address that today. We'll look at two options. One, dropping into a shell and just using psql to look at those. We can take that route. We can also use a cool tool called pgAdmin that will allow us to give us some insight into that. It's a visual explorer of our database. Now, this is another service that we'll want to add to our Docker Compose file. And there are a couple ways that we can do this. Every time we start the application up, we'd have to log into this pgAdmin tool, or we can kind of automate that process as well. So we're going to look at all of those options today. So this is going to be a fun one. What are we waiting for? Let's head over to start.spring.io and get started. All right, here we are at start.spring.io. I'm going to choose a Maven project using Java in the latest version of Spring Boot, which is 3.1.1 at the time of this recording. I'm going to choose a group ID of dev.danvega. I'm going to call this pgAdmin, and we'll leave all of this the same. I'm going to use Java 17, and we'll need a few dependencies. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the web dependency. We're going to go ahead and grab some data. So I'm going to say Spring Data JPA. I'm also going to need Postgres. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead and include the Spring Boot Docker Compose support. So again, this is one of the things that have changed. Before, this was something we had to add in manually because it wasn't quite there yet. But now it's built into Spring Boot 3.1. We can just choose it from our dependencies list. So we're using web, a Spring Data JPA, a Postgres driver, and the Docker Compose support. If we do a quick explore on the project, you'll see that a compose.yaml was created for us. So no longer do you have to just create this manually. Because you're including the Docker Compose module and then a service that would need to get written to it, Spring Boot, the Spring Initializer is going to write that directly to it for you. So cool. So we have everything we need to get started. Let's go ahead and generate this project. This is going to download a zip for you. You can go ahead and open this up in whatever IDE or text editor you're most productive in. I'm going to open it up in IntelliJ Ultimate Edition, and we will get rolling. All right, so I'm going to get started here. I'm going to refactor this and rename this to application. Now, again, we're just building out a simple application to kind of show this off today, but I'm building out an application called Sessions where we can manage events with sessions and speakers and all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm going to use that in today's example, but again, we're just doing this so that we can have some type of data that we're persisting to a database, right? So we can go ahead and take a look at it. So I'm going to create a new package here. I'm going to call this event. We'll just start off with one of those entities that I'm kind of working with right now, and that is called an event. So this could be something like a conference. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this with @entity. We are using Spring Data JPA. I'm going to go ahead and just paste in some data here. So the event is going to have things like ID, name, description, start date, end date, CFP start date. So that's the call for proposals, the CFP end date, location, and a website. So from this, we're going to need a few things. We're going to need some constructors here. We're going to need a noarg constructor. We may need a constructor to take in all of this. So let's go ahead and do that. And then what we'll need are getters and setters. So we'll say getters and setters for each of these. And then we will need a toString. So I'll go ahead and create that. And there we go. So 126 lines later, and we have a simple data carrier class, of course. Records really help in this instance, but not when it comes to Spring Data or JPA in general, right? So we have our entity. We need a repository for this. So I'm going to say we need a event repository. This is going to be an interface. We are going to extend the list CRUD repository interface in Spring Data. First, we need a type. The type is going to be event. We need the ID of that type, and in this case, it's going to be an integer. So we have our repository. We'll need actually, we don't really need a controller right now because all we're doing is inserting some data. So how are we going to insert some data? We're going to create a new bean of type command line runner. And in this command line runner, we are going to return args, yes. And we need an instance of that event repository. So let's do that. Here's our repository. And now we can go ahead and persist let's just persist one event. All right, so I'm going to say if the repository.count is equal to 0, let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to go ahead and set up an event here. So we're going to call this event imported class. Yes. All right, so this is the event that we are creating here. It has an ID of 1, a name of Spring 1 at VMware Explorer. We have our description, August 21st through the 24th. And then we have some days for the CFP, the location, and the website. So if we have that event, we want to go ahead and persist that off to a database. How do we do so? We just use our repository. We can say save, and then we can go ahead and pass in that event. So that should go ahead and persist off to the database. Let's just go ahead and log something here. So I'm going to create a logger, and we'll call that log, and we'll just say log.info event created, and that event created is going to be the event.get name. And that should be good. So now, again, what we've done here is we've added nothing to the database properties here. We've not set up a connection to the database. Because of that Docker Compose module, we're going to pull those properties here from the Compose file. And we are going to automatically start up a database. So without setting anything up, we have our Docker Compose file. Let's see if this will work. So we're going to start our application. And, Docker's not running. So we need to make sure Docker is running, which we can do right now. And with Docker running, I'll go ahead and rerun this application. All right, so a couple things when it comes to JPA here. Spring.jpa.generate DDL we want to turn on. So we're going to turn that on. We get our DDL created for us. Also, when it comes to Hibernate's DDL, we want to set that to create drop. So that creates and drops it every time. And then finally, I do want some SQL shown. So I'm going to say show SQL equals true. Okay, so now with those two things out of the way, I think we should be able to run this application. And we can see that everything looks like it went through. We see our insert into that event. So we can see from the SQL that everything went through, but I want to get some access to this database. Like I want to look at the database myself and verify that that is indeed working, that we have a record in the database. All right, so we're going to type out docker exec -it, and then we need the name of the container that we are targeting here. In that case, it is pgAdmin Postgres 1. So we'll say that, and then we need to go ahead and run psql. We'll use the argument -u for user, And then we are going to grab the user from our Docker Compose file. So in that case, this is going to be my user. And again, you can go ahead and change the connection information for your application. So my user, and then what I need is the database name, which in this case is my database. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And this now drops us into pSQL. So we are connected to pSQL to that container. So now I need some commands. You can go ahead and look up some commands for pSQL. I'll give you just a couple that will help you out. First off, /L will give you a list of the databases. In our case, we know that my database is the one we want to connect to. So we can say, go ahead and connect to my database. And that will go ahead and connect it to us. So now we can go ahead and run any commands we need against my database. Now I want to see what tables are available to me, so I can say /DT, and we can see that we have public schema, event, table, and the owner is my user. So we have a table called event. So I should be able to just say select star from event, and there we are. So now we have our you see all of the columns here, so all of the columns, and then here's the data for that particular event. So if I just wanted some basic data, so give me select ID and name from event. There we go. We have our ID of one and then our name of our first event. So this is one way that we can view the data in our Postgres database. Another one is by using a tool called pgAdmin. All right, so if you want to find out more about pgAdmin, head over to pgAdmin.org. It is the most popular and feature-rich open source administration and development platform for PostgreSQL and the most advanced open source database in the world. So go ahead and check out this website for more info, some videos on getting started. You can even download it, check out the docs. But what we are going to do today is head back over to our IDE and open up our Compose file. So we are going to add this as another service in our Docker Compose. So right now I have a service for Postgres. I'm going to paste in some code for pgAdmin. And all we're doing is setting a container name for this. So I'm saying, hey, give me a container name. And actually, let's not even do that. Let's let it create one for us. But in the repo that you look at in the description below, this is the final code for a lot of the stuff I'm working on with the Sessions app for a bunch of tutorials that we're going to go through here on the channel. So the image is going to use this image. That is the pgAdmin image, which is the latest version. You need a couple environment variables. When you launch the application, it'll ask for an email and a password. So we are setting up a default email and password, and then we are setting a port to 5050, and we're mapping those ports here. All right, so with that in place, let's go ahead and try and restart our application. And let's see if it finds that, and it looks like pgAdmin, container pgAdmin, Postgres pgAdmin. Those are getting created for us because that compose file is in the root there. And looks like everything went according to plan. Let's head back over to the browser and go to localhost 5050. And this should bring up the login for pgAdmin, which it does. So we're going to log in with admin at localhost, and the password is going to be admin. And this is great. We are brought in here to our pgAdmin. So from here, we need some servers. We need to create a connection to that database that we're running. So we're going to register a server. Let's just call this pgAdmin. pgAdmin demo. All right, and now here's where things get fun. We need a connection to that database, the host name and the address. So how are we going to do this? I'm going to head back over here and go to the terminal. Let's clear this out. And what we need to do is we need to get the IP address for the container that we're running. So we can go docker ps. Here is the container for the again, this is for the Postgres database. So I know it's this one. So what I'm going to do is grab the container ID of this. So my pgAdmin Postgres 1, and I'm going to say docker if I could spell or have my hands on the right keys, docker inspect. We're going to pass in that ID, and I don't want to inspect all of that because there's a lot of data it will dump out. I just want to find the IP address. And if we look in there, we can see here is the IP address that we're interested in. So if we take that and go back to our connection here, the port is 5432. The database is, again, this is coming from here. So my database, my user, and secret. So we're going to say my database, my user, and secret. Again, change these for your application. And if we go ahead and connect, we can connect to it. So now database, my database, let's look at the public schema. And if we look at tables, we see event. We can go ahead and run this in the query tool, select star from event. And now we can go ahead and run this and we see our data. So this is a tool that we're all used to, some type of GUI that we're all used to using to go ahead and check out tables and data and all the things that we'd expect to from a database. So this is great. Now there is one problem with this approach. If we go ahead and restart our application, all right, and we refresh. Now we have to log in again. So this gets pretty tedious, logging in, logging out. Like I want to start my application. I just want this to automatically log in for me. And that's where this GitHub repo comes in from my coworker and good friend Adib, who put together a Docker Compose Postgres. So this is an entire kind of post on why this Docker Compose file looks like it is. Here's his overview. Why does this work? How does this work? He goes through and talks about setting up volumes and setting up the container. And from that container, there's a JSON file that will list out your connection to your DB. So how is this all going to work? There's that JSON file. So I would go ahead and pause this video and go ahead and open that up, take a look at it, understand what we're doing there, and then we'll just see this in action. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to go ahead and include the YAML configuration that I have in the repository below. So just a couple changes here. We are setting the version. We're setting some volumes for both Postgres and pgAdmin. Again, setting a container name, not a big change. Most of this is the same, right? What is different here is the pgAdmin config server mode. We're setting that to false. We're setting the config master password required to false. And then we're saying, hey, we need to go ahead and look at this servers.json. So we need to create that. Let's go ahead and create that in the root. So new file, and this is called docker pgAdmin servers.json, and we'll paste in some info there. Again, this just has my username, my database host. This is where the naming that container comes in. Here's the database name, and here's our pass file. So with that, this is where kind of the magic happens. It will go ahead and try to connect to that and then use that servers.json. So let's see if now we can go ahead and start this application. Oh, all right. So this container is already in use. I want to go ahead and stop that. Again, this was from the overall application that I'm working on, the bigger app, which is already running. So I just want to go ahead and make sure that one is stopped. And let's just go ahead and say night-night. All right, and there we go. We have started up. Let's see if we can go back to localhost 5050. And you can see that it automatically logs us in for us and defines that server. And we have our databases here, and here's that session database. And if we go ahead and look at the schema, public, we see our table of events still. So cool, that makes my dev lifecycle, my workflow, my inner loop development Much more streamlined, if you ask me. I don't have to log into that database every single time. So this is really great. Big fan of this. Thank you, Adib, for that GitHub repo that really kind of fixed the gap there and how to make that actually work. So cool. This was exciting. We took a look at the new Docker Compose support module. This gives us the ability to automatically spin up that container. It actually creates the Docker Compose file for us. And then we took a look at, all right, if we have a Postgres database in place, how do we go ahead and connect to it and look at the tables, look at the data? And we saw that through pSQL, but we also saw that through a tool called pgAdmin, which I think is really great in this scenario. So, hey, I hope you found this helpful. If you did, do me a big favor, leave me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below. Let me know that these tutorials are helping you out. And as always, friends, happy coding.